Hearing revenue talent in SaaS is not just about filling a seat. A strong SaaS engineer, solution architect, customer success leader, RevOps operator, or GTM executive can directly affect pipeline retention, customer trust, expansion, revenue, and company growth. But high growth SaaS companies cannot afford slow hiring, and they also cannot afford the wrong hire. Today, we are going to talk about specialized SaaS recruiting, pre-sales, and post-sales talent, why quality matters more than resume volume, and how AI can support recruiters without replacing the human judgment required to make great placements. Welcome to another edition of the Smart Office Podcast. I am your host, Hippolyte Asa. I am an AI implementation engineer, and I help small businesses use practical AI systems to improve operations, client experience, and growth. Today, I am excited to welcome Avi Kakanji, founder and CEO of Elite Talent Recruiting. Elite Talent Recruiting helps high-growth SaaS companies find and hire pre-sales, post-sales, GTM, RevOps, marketing, and executive revenue talent. The firm is built around deep specialization, pre-vetted shortlist, fast delivery, and long-term placement quality. Avi, welcome to the Smart Office Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Avi, I was interested in Elite Talent because your positioning is very specific. I mean, you are not just trying to recruit for every role in every industry, which is different today. You are focused on SaaS revenue talent, the people who help technical products win customers, onboard them, retain them, and scale the revenue engine. That specialization matters because a general recruiter may not fully understand the difference between a strong sales engineer, solution architect, a technical account manager, SM, or RevOps leader. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
I'm glad to have you here. I think we're going to talk about lots of things. Founders, these SaaS founders, CROs, hiring managers, recruiters, and everything in the recruiting industry and where the market is today. And a lot of people are interested. They want to know where they are. You have clients, potential customers, as well as clients. So job seekers will be interested to know where they fall and if you can help them or guide them in their next career move. So I'm really excited to have you here and for everybody listening, pay attention. We're really going to talk about deep dive into some of these things. So Avi, let's start with your story before we go into recruitment and where the market is today. Before we get into SaaS recruiting, can you share maybe a little bit about yourself, what led you into recruiting and what eventually led you to build Elite Talent Recruiting?
Sure. And I'll keep a long story short, but I'm originally from Albania. I moved here in the US when I was 17.
Yeah.
And obviously, I went to college, did all the kind of like the traditional path and was working jobs after college, really adjacent to recruiting in general, like HR, consulting businesses on how to grow their businesses and how to hire and how to fire and how to implement good hiring processes and interview processes that they wouldn't give them a ton of turnover. So I learned a lot while being there. And my cousin, she's actually a sales engineer. She was looking for a job at the time a couple of years back and kind of came back to me and was like, hey, I know you know a lot about hiring and interviewing. Can you help me just through my processes? So while I was helping her, I learned a lot about, pre-sales and post-sales in general.
Right.
And I also found out that there wasn't a ton of recruiters that specialized in pre-sales. And in fact, I didn't find any at the time. And a lot of other recruiters that I was talking to, they said, yeah, they do like 1 to 2 roles a year, which was very interesting to me because usually, you'll do more than those, especially if it's like a good role that drives revenue. And I spoke to my cousin. I was like, hey, how come like this role is so extinct? And she was like, well, it's not that it's a rare role. It's just that most people don't understand it. So that kind of sparked an idea in my head. And I was like, wow, I can believe, not a lot of people know about this. So then honestly, one thing led to another, and I started working in this app.
Can you explain a little bit more because a lot of people don't know what pre-sales is.
Yeah.
Can you deep dive into that a little bit?
Great question. So pre-sales is kind of how we generalize it in kind of like one department, and it also includes like actual sales roles. However, really in terms of pre-sales, it kind of falls into these roles called sales engineering or demo engineer or value engineer, which are basically people with sometimes a very strong technical background. Maybe they were a software developer of some sort, but they also have really good people skills. So they are customer facing. So it's a mixture of technical role along with sales. And usually we call it pre-sales because they sit up in the pre-sales side of things. So as the sales aspect is happening of, when I'm selling a product to a client, they join the sales team on those calls and typically explain the technical aspects. And it can get very complicated from there, but to keep it simple, it's typically
Wow.
a sales
Yeah.
plus technical.
Yeah. Well, let's zoom on that because a lot of people don't know that. I've seen a lot of technical people sometimes they don't know that these roles they exist and that they can actually find themselves doing some of these roles or even apply for some of these roles. Sometimes it's been looked at sales should be for salespeople who now
Right,
have to learn the technicalities of those things as opposed to being technical, being
right.
on a pre-sales call, which makes it very interesting. So what made you when you specialize pre-sales? So have you seen the rise of pre-sales roles, or when you got into it?
Yes.
Like, how do you do it with if you have to feel, or maybe your clients don't know that they probably need to recruit for these roles? How did you get
Yeah.
about to getting them excited about recruiting for pre-sales?
So in my world, pre-sales, I would say, like, of course, if you're outside of it, you probably don't know it as much. But in my world, a lot of these founders are looking for sales engineers or these technical sales roles because a lot of them have complex technical products. So that when they're explaining it to clients or when they're selling it, they need somebody that is competent in both.
Right.
So that part is not necessarily an issue. What I will say is, one of the biggest things I've had to try and overcome in a way is really pushing the value of a sales engineer or just pre-sales in general as a revenue department because these people are paid on commission as well, not as much as a actual salesperson, but they still get commission and they do drive value to those contracts. A lot of my kind of work has been rooting for these people that do these roles and really showcasing the values that they bring to the organization. And what I mean value, which is what every organization cares about, is the bottom line, right? So the value of how they increase that bottom line. So that's been a really fun thing to see, even back then when I started like 3 years ago to now, how much has changed and how much more organizations now and founders really value this specific position and they're hiring for more of these types of people versus like back then it was a little bit more educated.
Wow. Okay, that sounds good. So when you made that decision to specialize in pre-sales, post-sales, and instead of why did you make that decision? So what made you
Mhm.
decide to specialize in pre-sales or post-sales? So do you have to involve post-sales? What is post-sales as opposed to
Yeah.
pre-sales?
Yeah, great question. So what made me go into it honestly, like I said, was just kind of that interaction with my cousin. It was pretty early on that I decided I kind of really had the niche before I even had a business. So that
Okay.
was kind of no brainer at the time. Pre and post sales, they kind of sometimes go interchangeably because there are some sales engineers and these sales technical talent that can also be implemented on the post sales side when it comes to like onboarding a client or making sure that these clients are well taken care of and they work in conjunction with customer success managers and technical account managers and things like that. So we do include all of those roles kind of within our specialty, including like, customer success managers or technical account managers. But that's why it's called pre and post sales because sometimes they work interchangeably as a person, within that role.
I see. Okay. So it means they can do both
Right.
pre-sales and post-sales. Okay. So when a
Yeah.
SaaS or when a SaaS founder or maybe a revenue leader hears about using any talent recruiting, what do you want them to understand about your approach?
Yeah, great question. I think what it comes down to in this day and age, because at the end of the day, it's inevitable. There's a ton of recruiters out there. Competition is
Right.
always at an all-time high, and not just in recruiting, but any industry. In your own industry too, with automation
Right.
and AI, there's a ton of experts and all of that. I think what it comes down to for me is just understanding. For me, it comes down to a relationship and building trust from the get-go. There's one thing that hasn't changed, no matter how much AI we input into everything, is People like to work with people that they
Right.
like and they trust. And I really try to live by that. Everything I do, whether it's on LinkedIn or, showcasing something, it's always about building a relationship and making sure that I can build my credibility throughout this process as well. So those are honestly the two biggest things.
That's nice. Let's talk about maybe some detail, maybe some story, some successful placements you've done in the past or how successful you've been. And
Hmm.
so that probably some founders or SaaS people can know. Without sharing any confidential details, can you describe maybe any placements or client engagements that are shown that shows that Elite Talent really does it work differently and that the approach has been very successful? Maybe some founders have been very happy or impressed with the results so far.
Yeah, I have tons of stories. I'm trying to think which one would be great to share.
Yeah, like
One thing that I'm really, I guess lately has happened a lot for me. A lot of my clients have been companies that expand from like Europe into the US.
okay.
And they don't not that they don't understand the market in the US whatsoever, but it is a challenge, right? Because the founders, the leadership is always it's going to be overseas, and you're looking to hire your first few people here in the US, and those are usually very critical hires. I have a lot of those stories, but I'll say one in particular that was pretty awesome overall. I had a client, they were looking to expand, hiring for a founding full sales role. In this case was a technical customer success manager. They needed to have a technical background, with software development and things like that, and help implement onboarding. I had built the relationship with this person for a long time when it comes to the candidate side, and he wasn't open to any sort of opportunities. When I got this client, I literally felt like he was going to be the perfect person. I reached out to him and I just pretty much was like, just give me 2 minutes of your time. Let me tell you about the role, why this company would be great. And, if you say no, then obviously, I'll move on. So he gave me the time. He ended up really liking what the company was about. And I introduced him to the company. 3 weeks later, he was hired. I mean, it was like one and done type of thing. They don't always happen, those are, I wouldn't say rare scenarios, but they're definitely not as common.
Yeah.
But that was a pretty fulfilling one in the sense of like how I kind of got this person from
Yeah.
no to a yes. And then of course, then I had to, take him through the hiring process, and the company also loved him. So those are pretty cool.
Yeah. That was a pretty straightforward and easy one. What are the common challenges you face, like getting somebody? Do
Oh,
you have
so many.
some maybe leaders or SaaS founders finding it that probably they don't need that role? Or what is it common, like the challenges you face in
Yeah,
the business and how
great
do you
question.
overcome them? Yeah. How do you get the patience to go over them and to be patient enough to wait for it to come by?
Yeah, I will say we try to do a really good job on the front end when it comes to like the roles that we're going to work on. When it comes to like how important is the role for the company? Is it something, do they have the budgeting for it? Where is the company going? Are they typically when they're hiring because there's too much going on in their company and they just need help right now? Those
Right.
types of clients are way more serious than somebody that's like, well, we're looking to hire and we just want to start anticipating growth. Those roles usually tend to kind of stop as you start working them. So we try to do a pretty good job in terms of prioritizing companies and clients and just making sure that we're working with the right people. Common challenges, I would say, definitely is hiring managers that sometimes have unrealistic expectations in terms of who they're looking for and how long they're willing to wait. Like they want the unicorn person, but they also want them in like 2 weeks. And obviously, that's not always realistic. That I will say that is usually the biggest one. And of course, there's times where candidates get offers and they don't necessarily want to accept, or they got a counter offer and they accepted that. But I would say the biggest one for me is definitely the expectations from hiring managers that we work through.
They want them faster, or do they want somebody quick? Do they make a decision late to hire, or do they just not
Yeah,
make a
it
decision?
depends. Yeah, typically is they want them fast. Obviously, they want quality, and they also want like they have a list of 10 must-haves, which, finding somebody with all 10 must-haves is really, really hard. They're gonna have to wait a long time for that. So it's really about working out with them and saying like, hey, I understand you have 10 must-haves. What are your most important five that I know I can go find? And then the other five, it would be great if we had it or if that person had it, but how do we make sure that you can coach this? Or maybe it's not as important for the role. So, a lot of the time on the front end side, it also goes to, I wouldn't say educating, but understanding what the hiring manager is looking for so that you can try and apply that without breaking their expectations.
Wow, great. Let's say, what are SaaS companies like? It seems like you mostly work with SaaS companies. What do they, or do you expand above SaaS companies into other areas because there are other pre-sales, or are you really focused more on SaaS companies?
So typically, SaaS, I mean, anything that falls within tech companies is
Right.
our, sweet spot.
Okay.
Pre-sales and post-sales are definitely going to be what we specialize on the most. But obviously, there's companies that once I work with them and they like what I've done so far, they'll say, "Hey, can you do this marketing role for me, or can you do this, actual sales role for me?" And we've had pretty good success with those too, so we do take those on. If it's like a really crazy role that I've never done before, like I don't know, like an attorney or a finance person, those I'm usually a little bit more straightforward in terms of like, "Hey, this is where specialty relies in. I might be willing to take on this role. I might not be willing to take on this role, and here's, the reason why."
How do you, in other words, what are SaaS companies struggling with most when hiring revenue talent today? Like in today's market, what do they struggle with?
Right now, in this specific time that we're in, is they're going to struggle with a lot of candidate flooding and a lot of not of the right people.
So,
So usually they will get frustrated with just there's too much out there, but none of what they're looking for. Yeah,
so there's a
exactly.
lot
So
there, but the quality is not there. So we're talking
exactly.
about June, summer of 2026. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people out there, but the quality is not there. So, in the
Yeah.
other hand, do you find it difficult? You find it because sometimes the economy is like there are just not enough people and they can just get anyone they want. But now there are so many people in this role who want to do maybe pre-sales or post-sales, but the quality, the SaaS
Yeah.
companies don't find the right person.
Yeah.
Let's say finding the qualified candidates, right? Technical debt, sales acumen, stage fit. What profile do they need, to be more specific, if you can, for those out there who may be
Yeah.
interested in doing this role and don't know they have the capability? What specifically do they need?
Yeah, good question. It's definitely going to depend a little bit on the type of product that they're selling, like if they're a cybersecurity company or a marketing ad tech company or, like a DevOps, etc. So for most of the time, they're always looking for somebody that has experience in their own vertical already. So like if it's a cybersecurity company, they would want that person to come from some sort of cybersecurity background so they can speak most of the language, right? They're always going to learn about the product, but they need to have at least a basic of an understanding of, what cybersecurity is about, what do clients face, etc. Outside of that, because of the nature of my clients and most of the ones I work with, they're startups and kind of early companies. Most of them are going to look for somebody that's okay with being scrappy or coming into a background that's chaotic or, learning something on the go and not necessarily having like the perfect onboarding. So those are usually some of the biggest things that they look for. Being okay with coming into chaos and either help fixing it or be okay with it while it's being fixed. Those are typically some of the most common ones.
Do you find it challenging? How easy it is converting somebody from who is doing technical,
Hmm.
convincing them to do? I know you talked about a story where somebody had to
Yeah.
see whether they could work with this company. How challenging is it or easy is it converting from probably a purely technical role to a pre-sales or post-sales role?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's that hard because there is a lot of people in those roles already. It's just again, finding about the good match, a good background. And if they are not in a sales role already within their technical background, it's just about understanding if they're a good communicator or not. So if I jump on a call with them and they can have like a basic the conversation in the sense of like it can flow pretty well, they're personable as a person and they have like a I wouldn't say a fun personality, but like a relatable personality. Those types of people usually will do well in those roles. Now, if you're like an extreme introvert that, hates being in front of customers or anything like that, then that's probably not going to be a good fit, obviously. So it's my job to weed those types of people out and just match them to the right companies. But typically it's just if they're not already in those roles, it's just about understanding and seeing if they do have a like for it to be in front of customers and if they're okay with being with that with and if it fits within their personality, is what I was trying
Right.
to say.
Early talent says it screens candidates for technical depth, acumen, age fit, culture fit. So how do you evaluate those areas in practice? How do you go about finding out the
Yeah,
fit?
so we obviously always screen our candidates whenever we're before submission to the company. Obviously, we look at their background, then we ask situational questions as we're on the phone with them or on Zoom to really understand if they know what they're talking about or if it's just like a line item, within their resume or LinkedIn. So a lot of situational questions to fully understand what that looks like in terms of a technical aspect. And then same thing, but on the sales side, we'll ask situational questions on the sales aspect or the business acumen aspect of,
Right.
hey, what would you do in this scenario? Or how does it feel, within if you're coming into a chaotic background versus like a background that's more organized. And typically they're pretty honest because they also don't want to go into an environment where they don't like either.
Right. Okay. So I believe you deal with companies at different stages of growth. Maybe seed stage SaaS companies, those that are already in the later stage for hiring, maybe already predefined grounded company. What's the different? What's the approach? What's the difference in their approach in terms of hiring, or what's the difference between hiring for these seed stage SaaS companies as opposed to later stage companies?
The biggest difference is going to be in their team. Who do they have in their team already? So, for example, in a seed stage company, most of the time there's very few leadership in place. Usually, it's like a founder or founder and a co-founder, and maybe one other leader. So, in those scenarios, it is very important to understand that the people that are walking into those seed companies, they're not going to have a ton of guidance, so they need to be more of an expert. Versus like if I'm comparing that to a Series A or a Series B, usually each department will already have leadership in place and they won't need as much of a expert per se into being their own leader. They need somebody that's more of a team player that knows how to help each other out. There's still chaos, of course, but it's a way more structured chaos than like walking into a seed. So I would say that's the biggest thing that we need to understand when we're working with those types of clients.
Wow, that's a very good difference there because we've got sure when you're moving, maybe transitioning from maybe a tech to a
Yeah,
pre-sales or post-sales, and you're trying to look for guidance. You're going to a seed stage, and there's nobody there to guide you. You might be thinking, well, maybe get into something that I don't know. But if you went to a later stage company, you may have some guidance and people that can
exactly.
help you out and walk you through the sales process for you to get your feet wet enough to pick up. So for people who may not know the difference, what makes pre-sales and talent or so valuable to SaaS companies? Like we have
Yeah.
SaaS companies out there, they probably don't know they need a role like this. And for some technical people, they probably don't know these roles exist. What would you want them to know?
Yeah. I'm going to try to keep it simple and not get too technical or too in depth in the weeds, to not confuse the audience. But I will say the biggest thing is somebody that's is sales and a technical expert cannot always be a full salesperson. So you always need a salesperson, right, to kind of manage that entire
Right.
cycle. These types of talent usually pop into the sales cycle once like there's been a discovery or once there's been some sort of pre-qualification from the salesperson. So they influence the sales aspect of that client's customer journey. So that's really important to understand because when they jump in, they're showcasing exactly how the product works, how it's going to fit within their environment, how it's going to adapt, and how it's going to bring revenue to their own clients, right? So what I've seen is that most of the time when there's a pre-sales or a sales engineer involved in the sales process, there's usually, and these are not my own reports because obviously I don't have that, but from the companies we
Right.
work with, usually like a 30% increase in closings
Right.
because of that expert being in the call and really answering a well-rounded questions from all sides from the customer that they're trying to sell to.
Sounds good. Let's talk about RevOps, GTM systems.
Yeah.
They are becoming more important in SaaS companies. What kind of talent helps turn GTM chaos into repeatable machines? But I want you to first of all explain what RevOps is for those who don't know, and as well as GTM for those who don't know. There are some of the
Yeah.
roles that a lot of people don't know they exist and that they may be qualified to fill those roles.
Sure. So GTM stands for go to market. So this is typically the team that will come in or leadership that comes in and really helps the company come up with a strategy on how they're going to market themselves to, their ideal customers. So that team is obviously, from the definition itself, extremely important. They're usually hired very early on, even before pre-sales, because again, they just run the entire strategy. They have an understanding, how clients or how buyers buy, their pain points, what they're looking for. And then again, they come up with the strategy, how we're going to reach out to these people. Is it going to be in-person events or emails or calls, et cetera, or LinkedIn? And then RevOps is usually coming in at a way later stage, and the company is not as important in the beginning as a startup.
Right.
Typically, we see RevOps come in usually 20 plus million in revenue for a company. And RevOps is really a function, I should say, that intertwines all departments together and makes them communicate with each other. It's like the easiest way to put it. So they're the ones that kind of sit behind the system like a CRM or dashboards, and they create this really important aspects for the company to make sure that everybody's on the same page, right? Because as you're growing, then you have department disconnections and it's hard
Right.
to see where things are going. So they sit, literally within sales, post sales, pre-sales. Usually they work really closely with the CRO, because CRO kind of runs that same function of kind of bringing everybody together. So again, that's like, to keep it simple, that's typically when a RevOps would come in and what they need.
Wow, that's good to know. A lot of people out there, a lot of listeners don't know the SaaS founders, so know some of these things, and they don't know they need some of these roles. Avi, when it comes to elite talent recruiting, as it continues to grow, some of the business priorities that you are most focused on right now?
Yeah, good question. I mean, honestly, as any other business out there, we're always looking to grow no matter what,
Right.
but doing it in a more efficient way, of course. But yeah, I mean, it always comes down to those two things. Is I want to help candidates get in jobs that they like and they like to grow with, and of course make money doing it in a very like fun way. One of our companies that we were working with, they actually just sold the 1Password, which I don't know if you're familiar, but it's a pretty big company and a pretty big
I
deal
know,
for
yeah.
them for 300 million. So now everybody that obviously we placed, but that they had previously as well, including leadership, they're all going to get a payout. And that's pretty cool as a recruiter to be able to say like, wow, like some of these people that I placed, their entire life might not change depending on the types of stock and shares that they got, but they will get a significant change, and they can be part of an acquisition. So it's definitely really, really cool to see. And I want to do more of those in terms of impact. And then, of course, keep growing and impacting as many people as possible within the space.
Let's talk about maybe the labor market, technology, and new roles that may be popping up in the SaaS industry. What have you seen of late 3 years, in the last 3 years you've been in the market? How has technology impacted? How has roles changed? And how's the labor market looking like for some of these new roles as well as old roles? What is the trend looking like in terms of the SaaS
Yeah.
world?
Yeah. And I think I'll speak for SaaS in general, but I think some of those apply to any sort of industry. The biggest thing that we're seeing is more roles being more cross-functional. So if you're just a customer success manager, you might own some aspects of maybe onboarding now or technical aspects that you need to be able to understand and do within the role. So that's number one. Customer or functional crossover between different roles is a big one. In terms of roles specifically, one of the most flashiest title out there right now is called a forward deployed engineer. That's actually had a 700% increase in the last 2 years from, companies not knowing what it is to like starting to hire for it. And now, I feel like everybody's hiring for one. So that's a really big one right now.
Forward,
Of course,
that's called what? Forward.
yes. And typically that person, to keep it in a simple way, what they do, they work on a post-sales environment for the most part, but typically is somebody that once the sales team sells this customer, they go out to the customer and they implement their own product into their company. Usually they are used for very big implementations. Like, to give you a very simple example, let's say my company is selling into Google. Now, Google is a huge company, so it's going to have to be applied between tens of thousands of employees. So now my company promises, hey, I'm going to give you a forward deployed engineer, come into the Google headquarters, implement as if it was part of your team, and fully implement it. That's the easiest way to explain it. So that is what a forward deployed engineer does. Other roles are going to be AI engineer, which, kind of like a software developer, but you need to know how to implement AI. And another big one that's coming up right now is also prompt engineering, which means that it's somebody that can help train AI how I would talk to AI as a person that has no clue about AI. So
Right.
in a simple example to say, like, if I want to code, I can just say it like, hey, can you do this coding for me versus saying like, the ones and the zeros like coding used to be, right? So those are some of the most impactful roles right now. But anything AI related, there's going to be definitely more roles that come into play. Go to market engineer is another one where it's similar to in terms of like automating processes and connecting systems and things like that as well.
Have you seen any, how about a hiring process? Has hiring processes changed? Are you seeing more and more people into the hiring process, and how do you manage them? How are recruiter staffing agencies dealing with the hiring process nowadays?
Yeah, the hiring process has definitely changed. I think there's definitely a lot of companies out there now that are promising, full automated interview process, which is not realistic in my opinion, but also not good for the company because when you're a small startup that doesn't have a big brand name, like Google, for example, most people would want to work at Google. Google doesn't have to really brand itself to beg people to come work for them. But a lot of smaller startups, they want really good people, let's say like Google quality, but they have to really prove themselves as to why you should work for me. So that is really important. And the worst thing you can do is automate your entire process with AI at that point, because when nobody knows you and they feel like they're talking to an AI, not person, but like an AI agent, it's not going to be any trust or any credibility or any attachment. So that's the biggest thing that I've seen is a lot of companies automating with AI. And of course, when you do that, the entire market floods. So now the same person that's a good quality is getting thousands of messages from the recruiter, the company, etc. And they just don't seem as relevant to them anymore. So really is breaking through the noise for the most part is like the biggest challenge on the front end, right? Because then once you're in the interview process, it's a little bit different and that helps as much.
Most companies want to scale without necessarily scaling the human resources, but probably scale in terms of technology in order to do more with so little. How would a staffing agency like yours manage that?
So, and if I understood the question correctly, you said how is
How would you manage? How
how's
would you
my
manage
company?
scaling? Yes, how would staffing agencies like any talent recruiting manage scaling without necessarily increasing human resource in terms of more recruiters
Yeah.
and dealing with volume?
Yeah. I mean, like anybody else, you got to implement AI. And if you're not, I mean, it's you're not going to make it too far without hiring more people. So I would say it's a good balance of implementing AI, but also still keeping it human. Like we don't automate our front end or any of the conversations with AI in terms of candidates specifically. Like it's always a human touch, but internally, I think that's really important that you do that. Like anything that is not fun for you to do as a recruiter, like updating CRM or updating, automating email reminders or, things like that, or using Claude to come up with a answer that, or research that it might have taken you longer to do. So a good balance of implementing AI without making it dysfunctional, if that makes
So, in terms of uh, what you're working on now, in the next 6 to 12 months, where do you see elite talent recruiting?
Great question. I mean, obviously, I see it helping and impacting more companies and more candidates and more bottom lines. On top of that, I mean, I would say just like a little bit like we mentioned earlier, a little bit more efficient. Of course, I'd love to grow the team a little bit more as well as we get more roles and more impact. But just having a bit of a bigger brand name too, that would be great, right? Because visibility is everything in this industry.
What are you most looking forward to? Is it the clients or candidates? Do you have a balance? Are you having more clients now or more candidates? Where are you having
Yeah,
shops?
it's definitely an employer's market, so that means that there's more candidates right now. Not that there isn't companies hiring, honestly, it's just again kind of matching the right person. So I will say definitely more candidates right now than there is in terms of employment. But obviously for me as in recruiting, we have to manage both. Like you can't have clients without candidates and you can't
Yeah,
have
I can have
candidates
a
without
candidate without clients.
exactly. So I feel like for me, it's always 50-50. So I have to spend my time doing both, building relationships with talent and candidates and same thing, building relationships with companies so that when or if they're ready, they can think of me. But yeah, it's definitely a constant juggle of both. It's not always, 50-50, but balancing the act of like, okay, one week's going to be more of this versus the other week is going to be more of that.
Right. So for clients who may want to get in contact with you, how do they get in contact with you, and what do you specialize in? Especially what you do, you want to let them know now that how they can get in contact with you and how you can help them.
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so that's usually the easiest way, and they get to learn a little bit more about me personally. But it's my full name, RV Karkanji, and as well, obviously, my website, elitetalentrecruiting.com.
Right. And you specialize in a lot of helping SaaS companies with
Yeah,
talent.
helping SaaS companies and founders within pre and post sales for the most part, and of course, anything revenue role related.
And what about talent? If they want to get in contact with you, what roles are you actively looking for? Which are the roles that you find difficult? There may be somebody out there who has a skill but don't know if
Yeah,
they can help. What
yes,
are the talents that
absolutely.
you're most
We're
after?
actually we're hiring across a lot of different roles right now. So anything from account executive, account management, value engineer, solution engineer, customer implementation engineer, any of those roles, if that sounds like you or something, that sounds like something I've done in the past. Again, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, my full name, RV Kirkanji, or my website as well. Either way would work, but elitetalentrecruiting.com.
Great. Wow. Avi, thank you for joining me on the Smart Office podcast. I really appreciate your insight on SaaS, more recruiting, pre-sales, post-sales, talent, candidate quality, client trust, and how technology can help recruiters and support recruiters without replacing humans, finding a balance between technology and the human touch right there to develop, to build network. It was really
I
fun having
appreciate
you
it.
on the